and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah. Delighted, as always, to be with you this last week of January, bringing you another conversation with another author. As we get started, I do want to remind you to please like, follow, and subscribe on whatever platform you're either listening to or watching this episode on. It really does help the algorithm, helps get this podcast out to more readers such as yourselves. If you would like to help the podcast as well as the network as a whole in another way, you can do so by going to gsmcpodcast.net. There you can leave a tip or a donation, whatever you want to call it. I know I always say a tip or a donation as though those things are whatever. You can contribute to the podcast and the network if you would like to do so. All of your support is always greatly appreciated, no matter what form that support takes. So thank you for everything that you have done for this podcast throughout its lifespan. And we are going on 8 or 9 years now. Wow, I really need to look and see what date the first episode was, so I know exactly how long I've been doing this. But it wouldn't be possible without your support. So thank you as always. And again, that website is gsmcpodcast.net if you want to support the podcast in that way. How was your weekend? I hope that you had, bad weather in the US. So I hope you stayed safe. I hope that you are okay. Maybe you missed the worst of it. Maybe you got just dumped on with snow. I know it's really cold in a lot of places. I've heard just terrible, terrible weather, especially wind chill, like -50 wind chill in Wisconsin, or maybe it's worse than that. I have a friend there who said -56 for her wind chill one day. I do not miss that. So I hope that you were safe and warm and home and your power was on, etc. But if it wasn't, hopefully you are okay. Everything is restored now. And it was kind of a crazy weekend from what it sounds like. Here, we just got a lot of rain, lots and lots of rain, and it is really not cold. In fact, when my friend from Wisconsin sent me that it was -56 wind chill, I think we were at 47 degrees that day. So nothing like 100-degree-ish temperature difference between you and your friends. But we are not, of course, here to talk about weather. We're here to talk about books and talk to one specific author. And today that author is Sandra J. Paul. We are talking about her book, The Girl Without a Voice. This is psychological suspense. Let me give you a description of the book. Born mute, 22-year-old Alice has never known a normal life. Kept from the outside world by her cruel mother and overbearing father, her only friend is her neighbor Hailey, with whom she communicates through sign language. When Alice's father is diagnosed with terminal cancer, Alice must attend and care for him, all the while listening to his feverish, drug-induced ramblings. That is, until in his final days, he reveals something Alice never expected. He confesses to murdering several women. Shocked and disbelieving, Alice confides in Hailey. Together they vow to find the truth and decide to journey her father's old roots as a traveling salesman. A pattern begins to emerge, connecting him to various missing women before the pair discovers the real reason why Alice lost her ability to speak and how she is at the center of her father's crimes. So that is the description of The Girl Without a Voice by Sandra J. Paul. As you heard from the description, as I already said, this is psychological suspense. Alice starts out life very, very isolated. When we meet her, she is in her early 20s. She is living with her parents. Her father is traveling a lot, so she's mostly with her mother who has issues with alcoholism, and so she's often on her own. But even when her parents are there, they do not communicate with her. She can hear just fine. So they talk to her, but she can't speak back to them because they haven't learned sign language. She tries to write. That works to various degrees of communication, but it's still not the same. She has the television. This is 1980, so there's no internet. There are no cell phones. She does have a television, and she has lots and lots of books, and these are her connection to the outside world. She does not go outside. She really doesn't even go out into the yard. Her parents don't want the neighbors to know she exists, and so when she does make this connection with Hailey, it is just something completely life altering for her because she and Hailey begin communicating via sign language just between their houses before they ever meet in person. And you heard that other things, of course, develop. She finds out through her father's confessions what he has done during his life as a traveling salesman, and she and Hailey decide to go investigate. And of course, nothing is ever simple in a book like this. You always have to find out a lot of things that are going to change the characters' lives, change their feelings about things. There's twists, there's turns. So if you are a fan of psychological suspense, then this is definitely a book for you. But let's go ahead and let Sandra talk about the book. Again, it is The Girl Without a Voice. The author is Sandra J. Paul. Hi, Sandra. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. I am excited to talk to you about your book. It's called The Girl Without a Voice. Before we do that, though, would you please just take a moment to introduce yourself so my listeners can get to know you a little?
All right. So my name is Sandra J. Paul. That's my author name. I'm from Belgium. I write in two languages. So I write in Dutch and in English. I have a family with three adult sons, which is really fun. And I have a lot of cats. So I'm a cat person. And it's kind of funny because I write in my writing. I actually write children's books, middle grade. And I'm also known for my psychological thrillers, and I have something very quirky called flip-over novels, which is the reason why a lot of people know me on social media, because my books went viral. Well, they're going viral all the time because of the flip-over effect that I have in most of my books.
Oh, fun. Okay. So that's kind of a nice balance. You have psychological suspense, but then you also write on the lighter side of things for children.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, it's really weird sometimes because when I do book signings, depending on who's standing in front of my table, it's either for a kid that's like 7 or 8 years old, or it's for adults, and sometimes I have something for everybody.
Yeah, yeah, I like that. You write in both Dutch and English. Do you write in one primarily and then kind of translate, or how does that work for you?
Well, actually, it depends on the genre, but for example, the children's books are always in Dutch, of course, because that's my mother tongue. But when I write psychological thrillers, and if I publish also in English, so if I write in English first and then I do my own translation to Dutch,
Okay.
that feels much easier than doing it the other way around.
Okay. Oh, interesting. I think language is fascinating. So I'm always interested and a little envious of people who are bilingual.
Yeah, it's for me, it's like it depends on really the story. But for example, with The Girl Without a Voice, I wrote it originally in English, and I've translated it now because it's going to be published in Belgium and the Netherlands in February. So I also do my own translations, which makes it really interesting because my voice as an author is also in the translation.
Yeah. Oh, that would be interesting. Okay. Okay. So can you give an overview of the story of the girl without a voice?
Yeah, the main character is a girl called Alice. She's about 24 years old and she's been living her whole life in the 1980s. So the story plays early 1980. She's been living very isolated in a house with her mother as her caretaker, and her father is a traveling salesman. Back in the 80s, it was normal that traveling salesmen they traveled all over the US, and he's often gone for the whole week, comes back on Friday, has his routine, leaves again on Sunday. And she doesn't have a voice. So she's been told by her parents that she has a medical condition and she's unable to speak. So she's not even able to like express a syllable, not even that. But she's perfectly able to hear. So she communicates with her parents through notebooks because they are not interested in learning sign languages, but she does learn ASL, but there's nobody to use it to or to use it for until one day she meets a new neighbor, a young girl named Hailey, who becomes kind of like her friend and who learns ASL to help her, but they never meet physically, so it's like always from a distance. And so that's the life that Alice is leading until one day her father comes home and tells his family that he's very ill. He has stage 4 cancer, will die shortly. He has kept that a secret for them. And when he's very sick, he starts talking about things that don't make any sense. And then Alice is stuck in what is going on, what's happening here, what am I going to do? And that basically brings her in a second phase of her life where she needs to decide, do I choose the seclusion of my house and my own safety, or do I go out there and find out what is going on with my life?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very interesting existence for, well, it's not interesting, it's very isolating for her, but for the reader it's this very interesting like look into her life, because really the only people she interacts with are her parents, and until
Yeah.
she meets Hailey, and they don't let her see people, they don't let her talk to anyone, they tell her that she's not capable of being out in the world, so she's very, very isolated by her parents. So, yeah, at the beginning, when I read the description of the book, you heard about the isolation. I spoke about the isolation a little bit in my intro, but you really do hear just how isolated Alice is as a character, and how that isolation has affected her, continues to affect her, and then what a change it is when she meets Hailey and she enters into this second phase of her life, because it does greatly affect the course of her life. Even if she didn't find out everything she finds out about her father, just meeting someone and experiencing life from another person's point of view, as opposed to just her parents, the only two people she's really seen in decades, has a profound effect on her. We're going to go ahead and take our first break of this episode. When we come back, Sandra will talk more about her initial inspiration for this story, for Alice, for the book. You're tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to work, cause my boss is a jerk, and I'm not even that paid. I need a change in my life, cause I don't feel alive, and there's nothing that makes me happy. Hold my beer for a minute, I'm about to quit my job, cash in for a ticket. I'm going on a trip and I don't plan to visit. I'm gonna stay there till I feel like I'm winning, and this is just the beginning. I need a big change, help me feel like living. I need a big swing, home runs I'm hitting, and I'll never look back, moving on till I get it all. And we all got dreams, we all want things, but what you gonna do for it? How you gonna move for it? What you gonna be? And do you believe you can do anything?
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with author Sandra J. Paul. Alice is the main character of the book. Sandra is the author. As we get into this second segment, I do want to give you your second and final reminder that you can support the podcast as well as the network as a whole by going to gsmcpodcast.net, making a donation. Again, all support is greatly appreciated. This form of support does help the podcast and the network, but all of your support does that as well. So just want to give you that reminder, but also say thank you, as I always do, for whatever form your support takes. But again, that link is gsmcpodcast.net if you do want to support the podcast in this fashion. Before the break, Sandra was talking about the overview of this book and the background to Alice as the main character. Let's go ahead and return to the conversation with Sandra. What was your initial inspiration for the story?
Well, actually, two things. I've always been very intrigued by serial killers. I think a lot of people are intrigued by them. Like, who are they? Why do they do these things? And so on. And so I'm a child of the 80s and 90s. And basically back then, with the whole Ted Bundy situation going on, Jeffrey Dahmer, there were a couple of people like the Green River Killer and people like that. I read a lot of stuff about them, a lot of books. I saw a lot of TV shows about them. And then one of the books that interested me the most, for example, was a book by Anne Rule called The Stranger Beside Me, which was her story about how she met Ted Bundy. And at that point, it always, like for example, if you would go into my bookshelf, you would see a lot of serial killer stuff in there. But it's mostly because I'm intrigued by what makes them tick, why are they doing this kind of thing, and so on. And I always wanted to do a story, like a timepiece about the 80s. Not because it's very hip and hot at the moment, but because in that period, there was nothing. There was no internet, there were no cell phones, people could really disappear without a trace and nobody would know about it. And I read an article once that I think about yearly there are like 100,000 people that were missing sometimes at the same moment, but spread over the whole country. It's not
Mm-hmm.
even that much. It feels like it's weird to say it's like a big number,
Right.
but it was normal back then because people just took off or they went hitchhiking, never came back, that sort of thing. And it was so easy to disappear.
Yeah.
So for me, it felt like this is a very intriguing time to write about. And then, of course, I had in the back of my head, it was a time where there were a lot of serial killers. And one of the reasons for this, according to science and according to, the info that, for example, police services have gathered about it, is that back then there was a lot of, you had all the I roads, the I-95 and all those roads, and it was so easy to travel from east to west and throughout the country for hours or days, and nobody would know where you were. And I felt that this was the perfect way to like really explore how that would work and how people would live in that area. And then the second inspiration for me was I'm also a translator of a couple of true crime novels.
Mm.
And I wanted to give this book a real true crime feeling, like this could have
Mm.
happened. Like this
Yeah.
could be a real story with a real person. And they always say that, true life is stranger than fiction. And I've read some books, I've translated some books that I honestly thought, my God, how is this possible? So that kind of inspired me to write this kind of book to really get people into that sense of, this was real life. This is what was happening to people back then.
Yeah.
So that put together was for me a very atypical, a timepiece, a period piece, but I loved writing it and doing all the research.
Yeah, it definitely contributes to that feeling of isolation for her because she has TV, but that's her only window into the outside world, really. And if it were now, she would have potentially access to internet and maybe a cell phone and a lot more possibilities for access.
Yeah, indeed. The story would not work if you would put it in 2026, for example,
Yeah,
because it would be unbelievable for many to have a girl live in a house where nobody knows who she is and that she even exists because nobody really, at one point, she really states in the book, if this house would burn down today, nobody would even be here to save me because they don't know that I'm real.
right.
And in this day and age, it would be so much more difficult to create a story like this where people would be so isolated that there's not a single soul in the world that knows that they're alive.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. So let's talk a little bit more about Alice. What about her as the main character do you think will resonate the most with readers?
I think her resilience, because she's a very strong personality, even though sometimes people comment to me like the voice that you write her with is quite young, but that's normal because she's like a teenager, even
Yeah,
younger, because
yeah,
she doesn't know how to grow up. So basically the growing up comes from her mother, who is not really a normal person either. So basically, her voice and her ideas are very young, and she doesn't really know what the real world is about. And the things that she see on television is more things like soap series. She's a big fan of soaps.
yeah,
She loves like those daily shows, that sort of thing. But it's not real life because in real life, like true crime on television is unheard of. Nobody really talks about it. She hears about the word like killers on television shows, on police shows. So everything in her mindset is very much fed by what television shows her. But at the same time, she's also very determined to get to know the real world. She reads tons of books. She really tries to figure out how people are, how she would fit into society, which also scares her. What if one day she would just go out there and become part of real society? How would she act and how would she react to people? Those are things that really occupy her mind. And I think it's really interesting to see how she deals with this whole situation. Like she's constantly asking questions, even though part of her accepts her situation, that she's isolated and kind of like kept prisoner by her mother, assuming and accepting that's because her mother tells her you're not fit to function in the real world. At the same time, she's still hoping to have a new life someday and to really be part of society. And the resilience that she shows, also the determination that she has, I think that would really I hope that people would really identify the person that she is, like the strong personality that she has.
Yeah. When you started writing, did you have a really strong understanding of her character before you started writing, or did she evolve more as you wrote?
I think she evolved more because the basic idea that I had was really, what about if you have a young adult, so a young person, she's in their early 20s, who has never been part of the real world. How would that feel? And what would she do? And in the first version of my book, I felt that I think I didn't emphasize enough on her relationship with Hailey, but Hailey becomes her moral compass, becomes her best friend. She means everything to her. And then at one point, I felt myself looking through Hailey's eyes. How would you, if this is your next door neighbor, how would you interact with that person?
Yeah.
And then at one point, she started revolving a lot more because she's the moment that things start happening, you can really feel the struggle that she's going through with her morality, with her real life, who she is, her identity. And then I think it was the second or the third version of the book that I really started exploring more about her, because in the first version, I didn't really know her that well yet. But in the second and third version, I really felt like we were one, because everything's written from her point of view.
Yeah.
But it felt to me like, okay, now I know her. Now I know who she is, what makes her tick, what she would say if other people would talk to her, that sort of thing.
Right.
So it took more time with this character to get to know her. Also because she's mute, so she's unable to speak a single word. So it did take a lot of research into that to see how people who are not able to express themselves in the normal way would act or react when other people would address them or try to speak with them.
Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense why you write it from Alice's perspective, that it's written first person from her perspective, because if you didn't, we really wouldn't get her voice at all if it was written in the third person.
Exactly. Yeah, I felt it was important to also, she only has words to express herself, and one of her biggest frustration is the fact that her parents aren't interested in sign language.
Yeah.
So her father barely speaks to her. Her mother doesn't really care that she wants to learn ASL. So she's really limited to her notepads, which is for her the biggest frustration, because sometimes you want to say something and you want to use a whole sentence.
Yeah.
But because she writes really fast, but it's not the same like using sign language and telling people with ASL, this is what I want to do. And her biggest frustration is that she's so limited in what she what she can say, that she just gives up at one point and just say, if you can't talk to me like this, and I'm not talking to you anymore at all. That makes her even more isolated.
Yeah. And it's harder to express the range of emotions that you're having when you're just writing it for someone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
So it's actually kind of interesting to me that we are ending two segments by talking about the isolation that Alice as a character experiences. And it's not really surprising because it does make up a very large and key component of her character and her character arc. But you see more of just how isolating the lack of communication is. She can hear, as I said, and as Sandra has said, but expressing herself in any meaningful way is very difficult because her parents do not speak to her in sign language or do not understand sign language. So she can't always express the full range of her emotions. We're going to go ahead and take our next break of this episode. When we come back, did Sandra always know when and how this book was going to end? No spoilers, but you are tuned into the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC. To access free content rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with author Sandra J. Paul. We are talking about her psychological suspense, The Girl Without a Voice. Before the break, we were talking about not having a voice, the way she cannot communicate with her parents, how difficult it is for her to have any meaningful communication with her parents, the only people that she sees for the first decades of her life. Let's go ahead and return to the conversation with Sandra. Obviously, with a book like this, we don't want to give spoilers, but did you know how it was going to end, or did that also change as you were writing?
I had the first version I had a different ending. There was a certain scene or a certain situation, I cannot spoil it, that didn't really feel right yet. And then when I rewrote the story, I changed that certain setting and what the outcome was, and it felt like, okay, now it feels complete. But I had the ending in my head. The very last scene was in my head from the moment I started writing the book.
Okay. And this
That
is where
didn't
it's
change.
really hard for me when I'm interviewing people, because I want to ask about that last scene, but I can't because it gives too much away.
We can do it offline, but that's
Yeah,
not okay.
exactly.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
but yeah,
But
the
I
fact
did
that
feel like it's a very complex book, and I wanted the reader to feel in the end like close the book and then go like, oh, like I'm not the person for, and maybe that's a little spoiler, not really spoiler. I don't want to have books that are tied up in the end where people
right.
just say like, ah, okay, now I'm
Yeah,
gonna have a cup of tea and that's it.
yeah,
I want them to finish the last page and then go like, wow, damn. Yeah.
yeah. Because if you're just gonna go have a cup of tea, then there's a lot of closure. This one really, I feel like people will think a lot more after the last page. They're still going to be thinking about everything
Yeah.
and like, okay, so now what?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I got some people who asked for, is there going to be a sequel? And I said no, because for me it was a standalone story, and like if you would take it from that point and then continue, I don't think it would have the same feeling to the
Yeah,
book.
yeah,
So,
I agree.
yeah.
Even though I love very thorough epilogues, I don't feel like that other story maybe it wouldn't have the same impact.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, Obviously, you had to do a lot of research for life in the 80s and Alice's but was there a particular piece of research that stood out as really interesting for you?
I think mostly the American Sign Language, of course. ASL is not that easy to learn. I mean, there are different ways of learning it, but back in the 80s, you only had books. So
Yeah.
you basically had a book where all the gestures were described in the book with what the meaning of it is and so on. Now these days, if you want to learn ASL, you can go to, and back then you could also do courses, but of course you couldn't do that.
Right.
But now you have like tutorials, you have YouTube, you have people on television doing ASL or sign language in general. The UK is always really interesting because sometimes it's really funny in the UK when people do sign language on television. There are people who actually do it in a funny and interesting way, and then it becomes really, really cool to watch. But it's also so important because most people who use ASL, of course, can't hear either. So for them, it is their only way of communication with the outside world. So I think it's so important.
Yeah.
But that was very interesting. Also, how I was gonna get Hailey and Alice to contact each other, how they were gonna connect. And then, of course, there's a whole part. I spent many hours going on using whatever maps I could find on the 80s in the US with all the highways and how long would it take to go from this point to that point? What if you have a 1980s vehicle? So it's not like different cars, different, it was very interesting to do all of that research as well.
Yeah.
So it felt interesting to do.
Yeah. So, as someone who was writing a book set in the US, but living in Belgium, why Kansas?
I felt it was kind of like a good middle point. And I also have a little reference, Alice is named after Alice in Wonderland. I think Alice in Wonderland was actually mentioned in a book once as one of her favorite characters, so she was named after the book and so on. And then Kansas reminded me a little bit of The Wizard of Oz, and I felt like, what state would I use? And I thought Kansas would be nice because it's kind of like in the middle, and it's like kind of like there's a lot of isolated places there. So I really thought about. I also needed to get her on the road, which is not really a spoiler. She needed to get on the road, so she couldn't be there in like 2 hours. So she had to do a lot of traveling. They also became part of the story. So I ended up selecting a real place called Hayes.
Mhm.
And then of course, because back in the 80s there was a lot of development, especially for middle class people, there was a lot of development going on. So I used a typical area where there would be a lot of houses, but people would still be like very private. There would be trees between the houses. They would be located in a cul-de-sac. So it felt good to me. It was the first time I used Kansas. I liked
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just thinking, if I'm writing a book in another country, like, how do you even start choosing a location for where you would
Yeah.
set it? So yeah, that's interesting. Thank you. What draws you to writing psychological suspense?
I've always done that. I think part of it has to do with the fact that I grew up with siblings who were a lot older than me. So when I was 7 or 8 years old, I saw things on television that you normally wouldn't see at that
No.
age. I wasn't watching cartoons. I was watching, like real life television shows. I was watching. My sister was a big fan of Star Trek. My brother loved Blackadder, that sort of things. So I grew up with a lot of TV shows that were very much far beyond before my age. My parents used to watch things like Kojak or like Columbo, that sort of thing.
Mhm. Yeah.
Like my Sunday afternoons were spent watching shows like Columbo and things like that. Cheap's the Police Show, that sort of thing. So I saw a lot of things that were way beyond my age.
Hmm.
And I've been reading psychological thrillers since I think I was about 10.
Okay.
Yeah, one of the first books I remember was really interesting. We had a library in my village, and I learned myself how to read. So as a young kid, I went to the library like 4 or 5 times a week, got all of these books, and then they had like a downstairs floor and the first floor and the second floor. So all the kids had to stay on the first floor, and then everybody else, the adults, go to the second floor. And I remember when I was 10, I got a special pass to go upstairs
Wow.
because normally you had to be 14 because I read everything. They said, you know what, you go upstairs, but nobody really monitored what I was reading. And one
Hmm.
of the first books I remember reading was Flowers in the Attic by
Oh,
Virginia Andrews. So I
very
read
Gen
that
X.
book. I took that book home, and there was this book with kids on the cover with flowers, and I was thinking, okay, and then I
Yeah.
read that book. I was like, yeah, maybe I should not have read this book,
You
but
and about a million other kids that should never have read that book.
exactly. And I was so infatuated by this story and the whole series. I read the whole series. Then I started reading more Virginia Andrews, and I started reading Stephen King. I started reading Stephen King when I was, I think, maybe 10 or 11. So one of the first books I ever read by him was Scary. Then I read Christine. Then I was, like I have a whole attic full of Stephen King. And it was really interesting because it changed my mindset on reading and writing. And then I remember I was writing like short stories on paper and on typewriters and things like that. And they always became darker and darker and darker. So I kind of, even at that age, I was influenced quite a lot about the things that I saw and read.
Hmm.
And I don't know, it kind of resonates with me, like putting people through hell and then not always having an happy ending and just making sure that they suffer.
Mm.
But that sounds really bad. Yeah.
Yeah,
My characters, my adult characters suffer a lot.
yeah.
Let's see.
One thing that Sandra said that struck me was that she said all of my adult characters suffer, and she's not the first author to talk about everything that they, as the author, put their characters through. This is fairly common, especially for authors who write psychological suspense, thrillers, horror, etc. And it's always interesting to me to hear authors talk about what they put their characters through, maybe why they put their characters through those things. We are going to take our next break of this episode. When we come back, we'll be talking about why she writes children's books and middle grade books. You're tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back. Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with author Sandra J. Paul. Before the break, Sandra was talking about what draws her to writing psychological suspense. We're going to keep talking about what draws her to writing, but in different genres. So let's go ahead and return to the conversation with Sandra. So maybe the flip side of that question would be better. What draws you to writing children's books or middle grade books?
Yeah, well, that's actually quite interesting because that was a fluke, really. I had a son who was 11. So I was published as an author, and my son was 11. And he said in one summer holiday, he said to me, when can I when can I read a book that you wrote?
Okay.
And I said to him, listen, why don't we come up with a story together and I'll write a book for you. And I wrote a book with him in, I think, maybe like 3 weeks, where every night I would write a chapter, he would read it, and then I would continue. So I wrote a chapter every evening. And it was called The Dark School. It was actually a dark magic kind of thriller, Harry Potter meets Stephen King kind of thing, but without the wizards. And it was really dark. So my middle grades are also very dark novels. They always play in the same village. It's a village called Crow Village. And basically, it's kind of like a hotspot for dark magic. So every story that I write plays in that village, but it also has a very different theme. Like sometimes this is about witches, sometimes it's really about people who are going through hell, that sort of thing. And it's now been, I think, it's one of my biggest bestsellers, actually. I think it's now 7 years. It's our 7th year that the book came out. And it's really in my country. It's part of school programs. People ask about it all the time, still about that one book. So it's really interesting. And then the children's books are basically about a small black cat who understands people. And she's named after Hailey, the black cat, who is also the mascot of our publishing house.
Okay.
Yeah, because my readers asked at one point, so you have a publishing house with a black cat. So when are you going to write something about a black cat?
Okay.
And so I let them choose, do you want to have a thriller or do you want to have a kids book? And they all said, if you want to have a kids book. So that kind of got out of hand as well.
Yeah, but an interesting challenge.
Yes. Yeah. So I have 14 novels now in that series, and they're very small novels, but I love writing about her. She's like a very mischievous little black cat, and the series has been translated into to 7 languages by now, so it's really interesting. Yeah,
Yeah, wonderful.
yeah.
Did you always want to write growing up, or did you decide later in life that that's what you wanted to do? How did that work for you?
I started writing since I was like a toddler. I think maybe 6, 7 years old. I wrote my first very small stories, and then I wrote a lot of stuff. I've written fan fiction for a lot of years. Back when I thought I'm not going to be publishing because I'm not good enough, I just wrote fan fiction, just doing whatever. I wrote fan fiction about the X-Files, which is a series that I really loved.
Mm-hmm.
And then at one point, real life came, my family, I had a business, and then, just the writing went on the back burner. And then about 11 years ago, actually 12 years ago this year, my father passed away. And that kind of like had me think about what I want to do with my the rest of my life. What do I want to do? What do I want to accomplish? And then the writing came back, and my partner said, "Listen, you've kept on postponing writing for yourself. Maybe now it's time to do something about it." So I wrote my first book, and my first real book in, I think it was 2013, 2014, something like that. And then I just sent it out to publishers, publishing houses, and it got picked up. And then it just started from there. Yeah.
Yeah, so 40 or so books in that amount of time. You've definitely made up for lost time.
But a lot of them are children's books. So
Right.
it's like a children's book is really let's say in terms of bigger books, I try to write 2 books a year, but it really depends on the timing because um, to be honest with the whole, I went viral in 2024 for the first time, then 2025 it just exploded, and then now 2026 is still going on, and it does take up a lot of time, which is nice because I'm really honored about it. But
Mm-hmm.
it also it means a lot, like I'm doing a lot more signings, I'm doing a lot more like a book. I have to ship a lot of books, I have to sign a lot of books. I do a lot of event signing sessions from last year in September. I think it was the second week of September until the last week of December. I had not a single day off in the weekend. So I worked 7 days a week for 4 to 5 months.
Wow.
And I can tell you that's really, really hard
Mm-hmm.
at one point, but on the other point, it's also like it's an honor that you're able to do that.
Yeah.
But I have to combine everything with my family. I'm also a full-time consultant. I'm a coach in real life. I have my own publishing house. I have 30 authors in my publishing house, and then I'm an author. So it's really complicated my life. But it
Yes.
does mean that I'm writing less now than I used to do, which is not that bad, but it still feels for me like I have to really pick my months where I can write, and then I
Yeah.
have the months where I simply say, I don't even have to think about it. It's
Yeah.
impossible to start writing now because it's so busy.
Right. Yeah. It's amazing you have time to sleep.
I do have time to sleep. I have a lot of a lot. I have some hobbies. I love to build Lego, for example, which is for me like a very really interesting because I have the books and it's very introvert. And then building Lego is also very introvert because you have to do it on your own. But
Mm-hmm.
it gives me a good time to think and reflect on what I'm doing in my writing.
Yeah.
It kind of like processes everything. Like when I'm doing sports as well, I'm doing a lot of cardio. When I'm doing cardio, I'm constantly like in my zone, thinking about books, about what I'm gonna write and things like that.
Mhm.
So my characters usually start developing while I'm doing cardio.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it gives your brain a different way of processing. So that's
Yes,
good.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, for sure. Yeah.
What advice would you give to someone who wants to write?
I think the advice I would give is I think my number one piece of advice is always don't write because you think you're going to be rich and famous. And don't write thinking about how am I going to find a publisher? You have to write because you want to write, you have because you love it, and you write the story that you want to tell. Don't write anything that you think what other people might want to read. You have to really, and it's not always easy, especially when you're publishing so many books as I have done in the past, I'm doing now. You have to get those little voices out of your head telling you you should think about this and you should think about that. Like last year, I had an argument with myself in the beginning of last year. My family, because I went viral with my thrillers, my family was like, "Ah, you should write the next thriller." And I had this story in my head that I wanted to write for years. It was a gothic, like a dark academia, Edgar Allan Poe vibe thriller.
Mm-hmm.
And I started writing a new psychological thriller, and I felt blocked by myself, my head and my heart. And then at one point, my partner came to me and said, "What is your problem? I can tell that you're stalling." And I said, "Yeah, I have this problem, my head and my heart." And I explained it. And her reaction was, "But you always tell your authors to write what they want to write. So why don't you follow your own advice?" And then I said, "Yeah, I feel blocked because my head says a psychological thriller would be better. And my heart says you have to write this book."
Mm-hmm.
And then in the end, I ended up writing my heart, like I wrote that dark academia, and I don't regret it for a moment. And it was really funny. My mother started reading it. She's 83 years old, and she started reading it, and she called me and she said, "I'm really sorry, I cannot read this book." And I said, "But it's not meant for you. You mean people from your age, with all due respect, this is not for you. It's too complicated. It's very dark. It's very deep." I said to her, "You don't have to read it." And she's like, she felt so embarrassed that she couldn't read it because it was so complex. And I said, "That's fine. Not every book will be for everyone."
Right.
But I'm so happy with the reactions that I got to this book. People are sending me messages about this book, about the ending and what it's about. Especially the same with Girl Without a Voice. It's a completely different book than the things that I've done so far. That I'm really proud that I can just step away from what I'm usually doing and doing something that's so different that it feels like this is a book that I want to write and want to read. And
Mm-hmm.
if people follow me, that's fine. And if they say this is too difficult for me, then that's fine too.
Yeah. Well, it's wonderful also that you have a partner who knows you and that you trust enough that they can say, "You're not listening to your own advice and maybe you should take a step back."
Yeah. Exactly. It did feel like that. I felt like I was like going against my own advice. And now I'm really happy because I wrote that book and I felt like this is something I really want to do. I want to put it out there, and the reactions are so positive on this book, even though it's very, very difficult. It's not difficult, it's very atypical me.
Mm.
Like people that are used to my type of book now read something that's completely different. But
Yeah.
I feel like I'm so happy that I was able to put it out there.
Yeah, absolutely. We started this segment with Sandra talking about writing the middle grade book when her son asked her when he could read something that she wrote. And then, of course, she writes the children's books with the cat and she writes psychological suspense. And so I am really impressed with how varied her writings are, the different ages she writes for, the different genres she writes in, etc. Her middle grade books are also dark, as are her adult novels. But I just think that's really interesting. Some people like to write a lot of different things. Some people like to really stick with their niche and what they're good at. I'm impressed with people who can kind of jump back and forth. And she was just talking about writing something that might be very different for her usual readers, and the challenge for her as an author, and maybe experiencing something new for her readers to read something they weren't expecting from her. I think it's really cool. We're going to go ahead and take our final break of this episode. When we return, what does Sandra like to read? We know what she likes to write. You're tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back. Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and the conclusion of my interview with Sandra J. Paul. Before the break, she was talking about current works in progress, what she's been writing, etc. So let's go ahead and return to that conversation with Sandra. You've already talked a little bit about what you read when you were younger, but now when you read, just for you, favorite authors and genres.
I'm still a lot into psychological thrillers. I love Frida McFadden. I think she's doing a really good job. Also, a very interesting young woman, an interesting author as a person. I love seeing interviews by her and how she goes about writing her books. Of course, still Stephen King fan. I've been from the start, and I will probably always remain that. And I also I love Gillian Flynn. I love her. She's one of my big examples. There's a lot of authors that I really like, but some of the authors are really they come out with a book. The first day it's out, I'm out there as well. So, yeah.
I think we all have those. It doesn't matter what they write. As soon as it's out, we will get it. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
If people want to know more about you and your books, website, if you have one, and any social media that you're active on.
They can find me on TikTok and Insta under author Sandra J. Paul. And then we have the website is just from the publishing house called hamleybooks.be. Hamley is like a black cat. So basically, if you find Hamley books or black cat Hamley, you will find it. There's more information on my books there. I'm trying to finally set up a website, but it's like a very long, a very hard process to find time. So at the moment, I'm just referring everybody to Hamley Books website, basically.
Makes sense. You've got a few things on your plate right now, so
yes,
there's only so much you can do.
Yes.
Sandra, is there anything that we haven't covered that you wanted to make sure you highlighted or talked about during our time together?
I think most of it has been covered. Maybe I can share a bit of info on I'm actually writing 2 new projects at the moment.
Oh, actually, yes,
might be interesting.
That was a question I forgot to ask you, so please.
Oh, no problem. I'm writing a new flipover. Flipover novels has really become this thing thing of mine that people are expecting, but also because it's kind of like my thing. So it's basically a book where you can read from 2 point of views, and you have to literally flip over the book to see one point of view or the other point of view. Okay. And I always try to do something different. So I've written a couple of them by now. I think I've written 4 now, and the new one that I'm doing right now is actually a very atypical stalker thriller. So you have on one end the person who's doing the stalking, and on the other side you have the person who is being stalked. But there's something very plot twisty about it that I'm, of course, not going to be able to share.
Of course.
But it's very interesting because it's one of the darkest novels I've ever done. Because I'm also into the psyche of the person doing the stalking. So I'm doing a lot of research on that part. And then at the same time, there's idea that I'm working on. It's also a period piece again, and it's set in the late 1970s, and it's going to be a cult book. So the book is about a typical American small town where everybody knows each other, but there's one dark secret in that society is that there's a domain that was bought by a certain very quirky character who basically presents himself to the outside world as being typical, I'm bringing the good news to people, and everything's love, peace, and the world is all fine. But I'm writing it from 2 point of views, where on one end you have 2 characters who end up against their will in that cult, and on the other end you have the cult leader, to see also how he reflects on what is going on and their point of view. But I think it's also very dark, and there will be some very hard scenes in there, inspired also by things that are going on even today, where people are choosing to become part of a cult for whatever reason, or choosing to believe what somebody is telling them, even though they should have more common sense, this is not okay, but you're still getting sucked into that situation.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
that has to be a very interesting challenge to write from the two points of view and make it so that people can flip between the two. That would be really interesting.
Yeah, I think in my next novel, in the previous one, that was the dark academia one that I told you about, you really had to decide one part and say, I'm gonna read through it, from beginning to end and then flip over the book. But in my new book, you're gonna be able to see it like flip over and say one chapter here, one chapter there. But it will really become a very atypical kind of reading because the chapters are very long. I'm talking about chapters that are maybe up to 20 to 30 pages, where you
Wow.
really get inside that head of that person. And you have several options in the book where you can flip, but it will really influence your point of view and your way of reading the storyline.
Okay. Interesting. Thank you. I'm glad you brought that up. I appreciate that. And I appreciate you taking time today to talk to me about a lot of your books and writing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you again to Sandra for joining me to talk about writing, to talk about this current book, The Girl Without a Voice. If you are a fan of psychological suspense, then you're definitely going to want to check this one out, especially because this is a main character, unlike maybe one that you've read before. You get a very different look at this main character and her experiences because she is not able to communicate as effectively as she could, partly because she does not speak, but also partly because of the setting of the book, which is in 1980, which even further limits her ability to communicate and how she is able to do so. So she is, that definitely adds a different dimension to her character and her character arc. So if you are a fan, like I said, of psychological suspense or of maybe a different main character than you've read before, but also then you've got the twist of finding out about her father and what she learns about herself and her own life through the investigation into what her father did. We learn more about Hailey, who is the friend that she meets and who really becomes her connection to the outside world, but then also helps her as she starts going through the major shift and changes in her life. There's lots of good reasons to check out this book. So if you are interested, definitely look into this. But also you've got other psychological suspense from Sandra and middle grade books and children's books. So you've got a lot of different options. Plus her flipped novels. Flip over? What did she say? Flip over? I apologize that my brain just lost that word, but those seem really interesting to me, and I've never read something like that. Maybe you have. I might have to give one of those a shot just to see what they're like. The closest thing I can think of for me personally, like my brain immediately went to choose your own adventure books. It's not quite like that, but that's where my brain went. I always died in those. Even if they weren't books where you were supposed to die, I somehow managed to choose the really bad option. But I do want to check out that because it does sound like something really different and interesting. So maybe that's something you want to check out as well. So thank you to Sandra for joining me. Thank you, of course, for joining me for this episode, and I hope you will join me for the next interview. We've had a wide array of authors and topics and different genres lately, which I am very much enjoying, and next interview is no exception. I'll be speaking with Dr. Wendy Johnson about her book, Kinship Medicine, Cultivating Interdependence to Heal the Earth and Ourselves. Wendy is a family physician. She's done a lot of things in her career, but she's really taken this book as an opportunity to look at healing, not only ourselves, but how we fit into a broader community and a greater ecosystem. So healing the earth and ourselves, it says. How do those things work together? How can we create a fundamental shift in how we think about medicine and healing and what we can do to do better? Because there are things that we are not always doing the greatest at in terms of health and healthcare and healing. So had a very interesting conversation with Wendy, and I hope you will join me for that conversation on the next episode. In the meantime, hope you're staying dry. I hope you're staying warm. Hope that this storm is over and you can go about your normal winter business as usual. But hope everything is well. If you're a fan of the podcast, please do like, follow, subscribe on whatever platform you're either listening to or watching the episode on. Really does help the algorithm, gets the podcast out to more readers such as yourselves, and that is really, really appreciated. Something else that really helps, greatly appreciated, leaving a positive review. It's not a huge deal. See, I overthink everything, and I can even sit down and write a review, and it's not, I still overthink it, don't get me wrong, but you don't have to. It doesn't have to be complicated. Just something simple, but a positive review really does help that algorithm, gets the podcast out, and I am so thankful for the people who have done so already. You can also follow the podcast on social media, Facebook, X, Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky. Love hearing from you. Come find the podcast and hit me up with any question that you can think of, and I will do my best to answer it. But there is a reason that I ask the questions, because people ask me a question and then I can't think of anything. But I won't have to do it in real time. You can ask me and I'll think about it and type you an answer. But find the podcast at least on social media. Again, I hope you're having a really great week. Hope your weather is okay. Whatever is happening, though, weather-wise, work-wise, life-wise, I hope that you are finding plenty of time to just get lost in a good book, because sometimes we need that space. So I hope that that you're finding plenty of time to just read and find that space within you. But that's my wish for you. Get yourself lost in a great book. Thank you, and I will talk to you next time.